Hey everybody, what's going on? Want to welcome you to this edition here of the Roto Grinders Daily Fantasy Fix podcast, special edition of the show today because it's our recap interview with our TPOY winner from the past year. We've done this with Eric Hafner last year, McJester, Al Smizzle, DP47, even a former TPOY champion. And this year, we're talking with the 2016 champ, Saahil Int, and he joins us here on the podcast. Artist formerly known as Max Dullery, but of course made the change this past year and worked out well for him. Saahil, congrats, man. I mean, pretty big accomplishment. Good names to have yours next to, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely happy to kind of finish the year out with that honor. Some great players, a lot of great players still playing, and it was tough, but I kind of held it wire to wire. No one that was chasing kind of crushed the live final, which was would have been the biggest concern, I think, for the lead.
Yeah, and I think Papa Gates finished second. He was $1 million winner. Chipotle Attic had a really good year. All those guys had chances in that live final to maybe catch you.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing is, you know, you're certainly a well-known player, very well-known tournament player. We're going to talk all about that. But, you know, you look throughout the year, and I think you have it on Twitter as well. You've never won $1 million in a single tournament. You've never won a live final. You seemingly have won everything else. But I do think it adds a good bit to, you know, that this win is pretty impressive in that, you know, there's so many of these TPOY points that go towards those ridiculous $1 million, $2 million payouts. And you didn't have one of those this year.
Nope, hopefully, but no, I think it was consistent. I had a lot of strong finishes across a lot of sports, so definitely like the kind of the way the scoring works with top 150. Maybe is that 150 scores account?
I believe so. Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty solid way to do it. Maybe even a little bit down to top 100, but I think it kind of rewards consistency and still kind of rewards top places. But you have to be consistent if you want to hold the title.
Now, if you don't know, you can find Saahil. He has a site called RotoQL where they develop some tools and some content for DFS as well. And we've talked to him before in the podcast, so I don't want to dwell too much on the old stuff. Go back to our archives. You can find it there, and you'll kind of get the story. But I do want to touch a little bit up on it about your history and where you came from in terms of your daily fantasy prowess. So take us through the early years of when you got started in DFS.
Yeah, I'm actually wearing my Draft Street shirt right now.
Nice.
But yeah, so I've been playing since pretty much since the inception of Draft Street, and I guess a year or two after FanDuel. I think this was 2011. The fall of 2011, I first started playing football, college football, and pretty much grinded my way to the top, I guess, at that time, and then didn't focus as much. And then I think Kanya really took over. He had a long reign there. And then I was still playing. And then I guess at some point my job didn't make as much sense. I was doing online advertising stuff, but data analytics there. And it was one of those where I could make the jump to do this full time. And then after I did that, it really kind of really took off, and was able to have I think that was two and a half years now. So the last 2.5 years, I think I've improved my play and been pretty solid since then.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing is, you know, the path to getting to the level that you are today. I mean, do you solely put it on the fact that you know, basically decided to do this full time? I mean, is there zero chance? I mean, especially at the level you're playing now, but was there something in particular? Did you change the way that you looked at daily fantasy? Did you change the way that you played daily fantasy during that time, or was it simply just being able to focus more on building tools to help you win? Like, what was the thing that changed in that 2 or 3 years time? Because, you know, I remember you early on, you were a good player, not in great player. You were a good player. And then all of a sudden there was like a light switched and you became an elite player very, very quickly. I'm just wondering what you view that caused that so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one thing was just the level of commitment went up a lot. So before, like, if my friends were going out to bar at 6:30 on an NBA slate, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll go there. Not much news will happen. And then I pretty much, and all those kind of little, kind of short, I guess, easy paths and stuff that I would kind of take shortcuts there. I kind of cut those all out. And then it was a kind of just a tweaking with my data analytics. It kind of reached a point, and I just ran hot for a little bit. I think those combination of those three things kind of happened very quickly and kind of came together. And running hot obviously increases your bankroll and allows me to kind of do a little more things and kind of really reaffirmed what I was doing in terms of the commitment required to be at the top.
Now, you approach DFS very different than probably about like 95 to 99% of the people who play it. Now, certainly you get the joy out of winning money. I think we all do. That's part of it. But do you actually get the joy of playing the game when you do it at the highest level that you do, where you invest hundreds of thousands of dollars on a night or a given weekend? And like, do you sweat these games nightly? Because clearly you're putting in so much work to get to that point where roster lock comes. Take me through like your given day, and do you get joy out of quote unquote the game itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely do. I guess there's two separate things, but I guess I'll start with, do I enjoy it? I mean, I love sports. Obviously, I think that's something that people will say that, oh, if you use a computer or you use data, you're not as big a sports fan. But I mean, I love sports, and I think to grind this hard and to work this hard, I think you need to love what you do, and I certainly do. And I also love the competition aspect. Love competing with the best DFS players. I'm definitely not a person that will shy away from any competition, even if it may be paying the sites and rake or site fees, excuse me. So I'll definitely not shy away from that, and I love the competition. But on a daily basis, I try not to sweat too hard. Obviously, NFL Sundays, there's a lot of money at stake, and those I'll definitely sweat a little bit more, and definitely good to keep abreast of situations for late swaps and things like that. But I think my sweating the actual contests has kind of decreased as time goes on, and I'll still watch the games, but I won't actually pay attention to the leaderboards as much. Just seeing like, oh, 2 points here, I'm winning this much money, losing this much money on that play. I don't think that's useful and can kind of really wear on you, whereas I like to enjoy the game and see how my players are doing and seeing if I was on the right side per se.
Now, I know a lot of sharp players were upset that DraftKings got rid of late swap for NBA. Do you fall into that camp, or are you somebody who is like, it just gave me one less thing to worry about on a given night? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, initially I was upset, not terribly as some people. I mean, it changes the game, and I'll adapt to whatever the new rules are. And then I think it helped me in a certain way in some of these high stakes cash games. I think I was definitely making some mistakes in the way I was handling late swaps. Not going to go into details specifically, but that kind of helped me a little bit. But it also frees up a lot of time and gives me a little more semblance of time after lock, because at doing this at a high level, you really need to be at your computer the whole night. Otherwise, you're just not be able to compete at the highest level.
Now, when you play the volume that you do, you're going to go through swings, and you've already mentioned like you don't follow the leaderboards, you don't follow the probable winnings on a given night, because the swings can be tremendous on a given just a play. But even in terms of a weekend, we've heard that you've I think it was 2015. There was a story that said you won $1 million, and again, it wasn't a single tournament, but you won $1 million in a weekend playing DFS. But for every winning weekend, there's got to be a losing weekend mixed in there as well, where you're losing six figures. How hard is that? I mean, do you even look at, I know you look at it as money, but do you try not to look at it as money? Because that's just, I know it's hard for me to comprehend. I'm just guessing it's very hard for a lot of people as well to be able to think of, six-figure swings on a given day, week, night.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting, and I guess my comprehension of money is very different and skewed than most people, obviously. And I live pretty frugally. I don't have a car. I don't own a house. So it's like this money is obviously very important and kind of a barometer of how I'm doing. But I don't try to sweat that part too hard. It's just a barometer. I got to work harder. Got to figure out what happened. But then again, if you lose 10 straight days, and I've had that happen, and then it definitely wears on you, and then it comes back and you win 12 straight days or something like that. So it's like this, and then like those swings, you're like on top of the world, and you're like, am I even good at this anymore? Type of thing. And I think everyone can relate to that. And I'm no different. I just try to keep even keeled and keep what I'm doing as long as it makes sense.
Now, you've got obviously some incredible models that you built, and I don't expect to get the secret sauce from you, but I'm curious of how you're able to do it for so many sports. I think I read in the story that you were number one in everything except NHL, where you came in at number two. How hard is it to kind of refine upwards of like 5 or 6 models at the time? Because when you consider you got NBA, NHL, PGA, EPL, NFL, MLB, you play them all. How is it possible to do that? Because I know most high-level players I see stick to 1, 2, maybe 3, but you're out there grinding the niche stuff too.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm very good at hockey right now, and soccer. So I'll say that, yeah, I'm good at certain sports and other sports. I'll have a tendency to jump into things and then kind of tweak them. So definitely the rankings may be incorrect on hockey and soccer. I'm definitely not one of the best players there. But it's something that I've always kind of thought about. And even golf, someone that I've definitely improved a lot. And beginning of last year, I wasn't very good, and now I think I've improved substantially. But it's just something that I've worked on even since college, is how to model sports, and built myself some toolkits on analysis and just do a lot of research. And that's one thing that I try to allow myself to repeat, like repetitive tasks. So getting data, analyzing it. If I can minimize the amount of stuff that I have to do repetitively into kind of automated processes in terms of predicting players and projections and things like that, that really helps me save time. So I'm a big believer in using computers to do certain things, which is repetitive tasks, like getting data and running projections, running functions and stuff like that.
Now, regulation hit the industry this past year. Didn't slow you down one bit. And I've made this very anecdotal declaration. I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. But from my perspective this past year, it almost seemed like entry limits helped a lot of the top players more than it hurt them. Because I think a lot of people thought, when somebody doesn't have 500 lineups and they only have 150, they're not going to be as good. And I kind of feel like that's inaccurate. I almost felt like maybe some top players were building more suboptimal lineups when they had 500 instead of 150. Any truth to my anecdote about top players like yourself being more successful with entry limits versus not having entry limits?
I think there's definitely some truth in what you're saying. Is this year people have really kind of had to focus in on where they are profitable. With the site fees, with competition going up, I think before, like you could say if you put in 500 entries and you're good, you're probably plus EV on all of them. And now that's not as much the case, and you have to really focus in. So I don't know where I stand. Definitely my ROI per tournament entry has gone up compared to putting up 500, or which I used to do sometimes. But in terms of helping and hurting, I can't. It's not for me to kind of say. I think that I've improved my teams that I put in putting in less of them hurts, so there's a benefit and take. But I think the regulations, for the most part, are pretty good. Besides the old experience badges.
Yes, those are worthless. You mentioned it here a little bit. Tracking your results. How closely do you track them? Is it on a nightly basis, weekly, monthly, yearly? And where'd you say you are most profitable? Is it in tournament play? Is it in head-to-head play? Where do you make the most money playing?
It's certain. I track different things, different sports differently, but it's definitely tournament play is where I make the most money. There's definitely some cash games that are solid, but there's definitely some games that are pretty tough where you're not making much at all, especially at the high levels.
I got one for you on head-to-heads here. What percent? Okay, let's say, because I'm sure you've got it all mapped out. I mean, you're an analytics guy, so you know who you're good against, who you're not good against. And what percentage of players that you've played, at least, we'll say 10 to 20 or maybe even 30 times of a sample size, would you say that you've got a winning record against in head-to-head? I know it's kind of putting you on the spot if you have an idea of that, but would you say, is it 5%? Is it 2%? Is it 10? What do you think?
To have a winning record against me? Or...
Yes, like, well, actually, let's flip it around. You have a winning record. Is it like 95% of the time you've got the winning record, or you could flip it the other way around. Maybe there's 3% of people that I play of that sample size who have actually got a winning record against me. That's probably a better way to put it.
I'd say 80. It depends on the sport, obviously. Something like 80 to 85. But then there's also, are you beating the site fees? And that percentage is obviously a lot smaller. So I think that percentage drops into the 50% range.
Do you think cash games, there's a future for them? Like, I've heard a lot of people saying it's dying. There needs to be some sort of changes to it to reinvigorate it. What do you think on that? I mean, are you somebody who, and we'll get to this, my next question is on game selection. Like, do you pick up games? Do you strictly post games? Where do you fall on that, especially with cash games?
So I'll answer the second part first. I'll pick up games at the high stakes level, but anything below like $5,000 or $1,000, I'll never pick up. And I definitely tried to, and I definitely don't play head-to-heads below $20 or even post them. So I try to limit that. I get enough action as it is, so there's no need for me to push that. I think that's something that eventually will happen, limiting the high stakes players. And then on the other point, are cash games dying? I think the sites need to do some work on kind of distinguishing skill levels. I think on the upper end, the top players, they could do something to change the game in a way that it differentiates the skill levels of the top players, and then while making it simpler on the lower end. And hopefully there's enough liquidity where they can kind of change the game. They did something like high stakes snake drafts with salaries. That would require a little more strategy that could differentiate the top players while keeping a simpler game for people playing less than $20, where the standard game may be too complicated for them. So I think there's something that they need to kind of distinguish skill levels. And if they can do that, then it could keep the games growing at different levels. But in terms of like the basketball cash games in a couple of years with the current format, I think are going to be pretty tough to beat.
You mentioned game selection, that you've don't really play much low stakes anymore. I think it was in the middle of this past year, some people kind of put you to task on that and said, why are you playing these low dollar games? Did that cause you to reevaluate, whether it was the right move? Did the sites ever actually reach out to you and say, hey, we'd prefer you not to play in these games? Talk to me a little bit about that philosophy for yourself in terms of, getting in lower stakes cash games and even tournaments, because I know there's, a lot of times you do still play lower stakes tournaments.
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a big discussion. I don't play anything below $3. Obviously, that number could definitely be moved up substantially. So I'll never play $2 quarter arcade, stuff like that. I guess it's a question of where do you draw the line, and I think things like FanDuel, with their limit of the number of entries that you can play below a certain amount, really forces you to evaluate what you're doing. I think more restrictions like that will help, especially on DraftKings side, as well as kind of growing the casual games or non-experienced games, with the caveat that the experience badge needs to change. There's definitely a certain point where a skilled player shouldn't be competing against an unskilled player, but the problem is that if you play for any length of time, you're automatically a skilled player. So I think that's one solution, but there's no hard solutions. I think that definitely raising that minimum entry fee is something that I'll consider. But at this point, if I'm not picking up games and not playing kind of three-mans and only playing entries that are greater than a certain amount for $3 and more, is something that I feel comfortable with at this moment. Although plenty of people have good reason to say otherwise.
Do you think other top players should stay below that $3 just as a point of growing the ecosystem? Do you think it helps grow the ecosystem to just stay away from that level, or do you think that impacts minimal? What's your feeling?
I'm not too sure, to be honest. I think it would be better if they didn't play. I mean, it can't hurt. But yeah, I don't know what percentage of people playing like a quarter arcade are semi-pros or something like that. And if that's a substantial percentage, I think they should really cut that out. But yeah, I mean, it's a question that people, DraftKings and FanDuel, probably have the data for, that could make a more informed decision. I've still cost them revenue, but hopefully we'll grow the game if there's tighter restrictions, which I think we all know are probably going to be coming in the future.
Let's talk a little bit about group play. This has been a hot topic on our forums, where you've got different players working together in their research and sometimes end up playing the same lineup. Nobody's ever made that accusation of yourself. You've always been, I don't want to say a loner, but you do your thing and don't worry about anybody else. But a lot of people, I don't say a lot, but there are certainly a fair number of people who do that. Do you feel this is like a big issue? Do you think that the sites need to get ahead of this in terms of preventing, people from playing identical lineups on purpose in the same tournament? What's your thoughts on those?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think it's definitely should be allowed to share information, discuss teams. But yeah, getting around the entry limits, and it's a very hard problem to police because you have these well-known groups that play together, but there's probably dozens, if not more, people that you don't know work together. And if you're just going to call out people who are more, I guess, publicly visible, it kind of creates an incentive to hide it. And you don't want to incentivize people to hide certain things. But in the end, it's not a good look for DFS to have people play so many identical lineups, especially in cash games. You have well-known people playing the same lineups, and then you have people buying lineups in similar teams, and certain people trying to get around entry limits. So they definitely need to get ahead of the problem, but in terms of what the solutions are, I'm kind of not.
Do you think you run into, because you played the highest stakes, the thousands, 5,000s, 10,000 buy-ins sometimes, and they've got big tournaments that clearly, when you get to that level, entry limits are single entry. Do you feel that even at the highest levels, you're running into people who are, in one way or another, trying to get around entry limits and have, say, 2 or 3 entries? And do you think like that's happening at the highest levels?
I don't think you see that as much in the 5,000 and 10,000 levels, because that would be pretty clear evidence of collusion in terms of you would play a different lineup and you would discuss what the other lineup would be. Because if you play two similar lineups in the 5,000 and 10,000, it's really going to be pretty negative EV. So I don't think you see that as much, but in something like $1,000 or $300, you'll definitely see people try to get around that. And obviously the two well-known brothers are at the centerfold of that. So,
and I know you've had issues with them in the past in terms of like 3-man games. Talk to me about that situation. Did it get rectified where what they were they, I mean, I've heard a lot of people discuss the possibility of them sitting games together and then dropping out depending on who the person was who took that high stake. Is that something that happened with you, or is that, what's your feeling on those two? I mean, clearly two really good players, but also related. I mean, it's a slippery slope. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're two very good players. No one can knock them for that. And obviously they're brothers, and no one really knows how close they work. But the issue that I personally had is that I'd seen them both in the same 3-man, sitting it on FanDuel, and then third player, and I've seen it at different entry levels. And obviously when they're joining hundreds of contests each day, there's definitely an overlap for mistakes in terms of joining the wrong contest. But if you allow two people who definitely have some relationship, you can pretty much get a much higher win rate by colluding on your lineup. And most people would not know that's going on. And it's pretty frowned upon, pretty bad. I think everyone can agree that it's something that cannot continue or should not have ever happened. And I have no evidence that games went off and they played different lineups in that, but I had definitely seen them sitting in the same contest, like $1,000, $500, and if they were playing different lineups there, that's a pretty big no-no. So I just wanted to call it out to attention, because something that I had seen a few times before, and there was a lot of, I guess, scrutiny on them going up to it, and then I saw it like the day after they won a Millionaire Maker. So something that I just wanted to call attention to, that someone should step in. I think FanDuel, it's pretty easy for them to not allow it to continue if it ever did happen, and if it did happen, I think there should have been some consequences. But I have no evidence that they were actually letting those games sit and playing different lineups, which would be the big problem.
We're talking about our 2016 TPOY champion here at Roto Grinders, Saahil Int. And let's talk about something that's important for everybody, but particularly important for somebody who plays at the magnitude you do, and that's the rake, the site fees, yes, as we are like to be talked about or used that term. But let's be real. You certainly follow it closely, because the slimmest of margins can make a world of difference for your profitability. How concerned are you about the trend of rake slowly but surely creeping up? And, at what point do you just say, it's not worth it? It's, screw it, I'm done. And has there been a point, and I heard people talk about this, a lot of top players were discussing a $1,500 buy-in, I think it was on DraftKings, and said, maybe we shouldn't play it. Like, Do you think like that could actually ever happen where people would say, because let's face it, there's what, maybe 30, 40, 50 guys who are playing at, the 5K level or something along those lines where they just decide not to enter a tournament on a day. Do you think that could actually ever happen in this industry? And talk about rake with me here.
Yeah, I have my hesitations that will ever happen. But it's something that could happen, at least a portion of them. But then if people are sitting out, then there's huge overlay, and then people are
jumping in. Yeah.
It's hard to incentivize people to do something out of their best interest for a theoretical something might could happen in the future. But yeah, there is obviously concerns about the site fees, especially at the higher levels. I think if the site fees were to increase any much on the 5Ks, 10Ks, 1Ks, I think you'd see a pretty dramatic drop off there because you're already playing at tight margins and people are pretty much well aware of it. What is surprising is that the $1,500 has had higher site fees and have been filling pretty standardly, pretty early. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to do educating the customers, but in terms of allowing them to make more informed decisions. But at the end, a lot of people just are just insensitive to those site fees increasing or changing.
I mean, it's a weird situation because you believe in the whole free market, capitalistic society. If something is filling, if there's demand for it, isn't it on a business from a business perspective, there makes sense for them to make more money on it until they find that tipping point. But on the flip side, like you talked about, you're already on thin margins when you're playing at that level. Because I think what people don't understand is why is it okay to rake 18% at a $3 game, but not okay to rake 18% at a 1K or 5K game? I mean, I think the answer to that's pretty obvious. It's all about level of competition. And let's face it, a $3 game is still beatable at 18% rake. It's pretty much unbeatable with the level of competition you're facing at the higher stakes. Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, the level of play increases as the entry fee goes up, and that should be no surprise to anyone. So I think you have to kind of keep that in mind, and then every business has volume discounts.
Would you be less concerned if there was a better rewards rakeback type program than we have? Because that's also been cut back, which, to be fair, we understand the sites are in a position where they've got a lot of bills to pay these days with a lot of the regulation and lobbying that's going on. They're operating clearly even at thin margins as a company. But if they were willing to give back to those high stakes players in form of rakeback, is that a solution to it? I mean, what's the happy medium? Because you can clearly, if you were on their side of the fence, Saahil, I mean, I'm guessing you understand why they're doing what they're doing, or do you not?
No, of course. I mean, it's a business that still is not profitable. It's been a long time that these companies have been doing business, and they need to, if they want to raise more money, if they want to grow, they need to show that they're getting closer to profitability. And like that, as you said, that entry, the reward system cut back by DraftKings cost me 6 figures a year. But I understand why they did it. Obviously, I'm not happy. I think the hope is that eventually these lobbying fees, these kind of lawyer fees, etc., kind of come to a stall somewhat, and they can kind of put some money back towards the players. A reward system is definitely something that is a good idea, but in the end, it still goes into the effective site fee or effective rake, and that's something that you have to monitor, and that's all that really matters, whether they lower it on the front end or give it back on the back end. I think that's something that probably will need to happen.
Have you said, I'm not going to play a game because the rake is too high?
I have not said that yet, but I think if that if the higher entry fees were to increase, I think I would definitely cut my volume substantially because of that.
Let's get on this potential merger real quick that's on the horizon between FanDuel and DraftKings. We still don't know what's going to happen, what form it's going to take place, but it certainly have an effect on you. I mean, you are somebody who clearly likes to get as much money and play as you possibly can. And let's face it, if FanDuel, DraftKings become DraftDuel, you don't double the liquidity on the site overnight. How would you react to that? Like, I mean, clearly you're still going to try and get as much down as you can, but I think one thing that I've talked to a lot of top players is, playing on multiple sites, or at least giving them multiple options, helps in variants that you're going to come across. Do you believe that there's, if this merger takes place and they combine into one site, there's room for another second site to grow? Because you're pretty much just FanDuel and DraftKings right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, I only played those. So there's a lot of questions there. But obviously, I think everyone can agree that if they became one platform tomorrow, everybody's top players' entries would not double by any means, and it'd probably be 1.5, maybe 1.4, 1 point, something like that. So obviously that will concern a lot of us, but I don't see that happening, at least not for a while. I think the very first order of business of a merged entity would be to raise money. And if you combine the sites right as they merged and then they showed a huge decline in entry fees, nobody would invest in it even more. So I think they'll definitely want to show growing revenues, growing profits until a time where they can raise more money. And then after that point, I think we might see a combination, but I don't see them having one platform at least through 2017.
Interesting. Get wrapped up here. We've used a lot of your time, but something that, what a crazy year this was. I mean, there was at one point in time, I mean, you got served with a lawsuit. Like, seriously, when you started playing daily fantasy, I can't imagine you thought, I'm going to be sued for playing DFS. What was that like? I mean, I know it sucks because it cost you a ton of money, but I mean, how surprised were you that it even came to that it took place?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked. The only way I found out was a tweet by Wallach Legal, I think is his name. That was also like, how has this happened that I can find out I'm being sued by some person I've never met tweeting about it? So I mean, it was an interesting time, and it kind of opened my eyes mostly to the legal system and how it's pretty inept, and it's if you can fight it with good lawyers, that you can win, but if you don't, then it's tough. But it was something I never expected, and it was just like looking at the document. It was kind of bizarre in terms of that the sites were in bed with the players and how to make the players more money and things like that. So it was something that I wish I would never have to experience again, but it just shows that how the industry's changed and how it kind of became to the forefront, and people are trying to grab money as much as they could when they kind of started to see these numbers from an industry that pretty much no one had any idea what it was, and most still don't. But 2 years ago, no one really had a clue.
Yeah, you got the old apex predator designation. If I don't remember, I'm assuming nobody has ever called you that in your entire life outside of that lawsuit. Crazy.
It was also, I guess, I did a lot of interviews last year, and it was kind of a reminder that if you become more of a public figure, you become more of a target. So. For
sure. Last thing, before you get out of here, everybody as a player can do better, including you. Yeah. So as you look at yourself and your play from 2016, what would you say, like, personal flaw is in Saahil Int as a DFS player? What do you think it is?
I mean, I'm definitely overconfident. So I would definitely jump into things a little too soon. Definitely anyone that's seen my golf teams progress over the years, my hockey teams, soccer team, like those things. I definitely want to improve on kind of those ancillary sports, and also just making less mistakes. I've been definitely spread myself through too thin. Certain times made plenty of mistakes that I shouldn't have. So I think cutting out the fat and improving on my weak areas, again, is something that I'm really focused on in 2017.
Well, very good. I'm sure you'll have another bang up year. I was honestly, think people were surprised that you haven't won this yet, but it is a big accomplishment when you consider the format that we roll it. It's not just a volume award. You have to do really well throughout the entire year, and you did. So congrats again on joining the exclusive Tournament Player of the Year club, and I'm sure we'll hear much more of you in 2017. And as always, Saahil, thanks so much for the time, man.
Yep. Thanks, Dan. Have a good one.
You too.